Hello and welcome to Wizards, Warriors, and Words, a fantasy writing advice podcast. My name is Jed Herne, author of Across the Broken Stars, and I am joined by my co-hosts, starting with Michael Fletcher.
Hello, I am Michael R. Fletcher, author of Beyond Redemption and the Manifest Illusions books and some other shit.
A lot of
Dirk
stuff.
Ashton.
I am Dirk Ashton. Oh, look, I'm actually holding it. It's not falling in my lap. Author, I'm holding up the Paternus trilogy, which I wrote. So there.
There we go.
That's me.
Today's episode is going to be about resurrecting old projects. And the reason why I want to bring this up is 100% selfish because I am nearing the end of my current story, which is an interactive fiction epic fantasy game for Choice of Games. It just came up to 250,000 words today, which is sort of insane to me. And It will hopefully be finished soon. And then I need to figure out what I'm writing next. And most likely I will be resurrecting an old first draft that I wrote, would have been at the start of 2020. And I'm just curious to hear from both of you guys, how do you kind of go about getting back into an old project or even deciding which project to get back into after a bit of a hiatus from it? Who wants to
are you talking about like books that you've abandoned and thrown in the trunk?
Or, this is more like I hadn't thrown it in the trunk, but like I'd written the first draft of it and I was like, I want to give myself some breathing room before I get back into this. And then I went off and wrote the Thunder Heist instead. And I was like, I'm going to publish that first. And then the Choice of Games project came up and I've been doing that. So it's kind of like, I've been meaning to get back to this for a bit. It hasn't been a huge priority because I've wanted to focus on other stuff. But now I'm wanting to do the second draft. And a while ago, I did, like probably half a year ago, I did read through the whole thing again. And I took copious notes on it as well. So I have a bit of an idea about what I want to fix with it. But yeah, does that sort of make sense in terms of the context for where it's at?
I think Mike has the coolest story of resurrecting an old book. How many had you published before you went back and decided to try to revive Ghosts of Tomorrow?
Well, actually, technically, I've done it twice now. So I published Ghosts of Tomorrow, which was a rework of my very first book, 88.
Mm-hmm.
So 88 was published by a Canadian micropress in 2013. Like 2016, I think I asked the publisher for the rights back. They were super cool. They were awesome people. They gave me the rights back, like no problem. I edited, wrote a couple new chapters, hired Di Giovanni to do cover for it, and released it as Ghosts of Tomorrow. That there was, because 88 had been edited so many times, it was at that point like pretty polished. So that's less of a resurrecting an old story for me. But Blackstone Heart, I started writing that in 1994.
Mm-hmm.
I got maybe 60,000 words into a novel and then stopped because writing was hard. And I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know how to write, didn't know how to finish it. As we were talking about before, I hadn't decided to write a novel. I wanted to.
Mm-hmm.
And then, I sort of rediscovered that story in 2015. So we're talking 2 decades later almost. Found my first draft, which was crazy. I had to chase friends that I used to live with, and one of them found the original Word file.
Whoa.
Like Word 2 or something like that.
Yeah.
He found the original file for me, and I was able to sort of eventually port it into a more recent version of Word. So I read through what I had, and it was awful. It was garbage. What I'd written wasn't salvageable. It was so bad I couldn't actually read it. I ended up just kind of skimming. But the idea was still there, and I still loved the idea. So for me, that was a start from scratch, redo the whole thing. But the genesis of that story, the character, the world, that all dated back to something I tried to do in 94.
That is remarkable. Because wasn't it
Yeah.
based on like a Dungeons and Dragons style campaign that you ran or something?
Yeah, so yeah, it was based on a Stormbringer campaign, Chaosium, that gaming company. That was like a decade-long campaign I ran from like, I don't know, like 80, 84, 85 through to probably like 95 roughly.
Yeah.
And that like an off and on campaign. But same characters and stuff, the same group of guys getting together.
That is so cool.
Yeah, and so that campaign was the genesis for the story, which I first started trying to write in, I think, 94.
Yeah, that's cool. What made you want to do that instead of writing another book, for another new book, new idea?
I'd done, part of it was laziness. So I was I still had all my campaign notes. I had all of the campaign stuff, all the world building stuff I'd done for the role-playing game.
Mm-hmm.
And that really all that is, that's world building.
Mm-hmm.
So I had this like custom built world. I had all of the magic systems. So if you've read the book at all, there's wizardry, sorcery, demonology, elementalism, necromancy, and shamanism. 6 different schools of magic. I had a magic system, a custom magic system built, to like role-playing standards for all of the magic systems. So they're all playable, like with spell costs and all that shit. So I had the whole world built, all of the magic systems designed. To not use that just seemed crazy. Like what am I going to do? I'm going to start something now from scratch when I've got like literally tens and tens of thousands of words of world building done, just sitting there waiting for me.
Yeah.
And because I had the character, I knew the character intimately. It was just such an obvious choice, and because it was a story, it was the very first book I tried to write.
Mm-hmm.
So the idea of going back to it now, that I was like, okay, now I kind of know how to write, like, let's try it again. I'd already written and finished and published books. So that whole like, oh, am I going to finish? Can I finish a book?
Yeah.
That's gone.
Yeah.
At that point, I knew I could write a book.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's the story that wouldn't leave me alone.
That's so cool.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's like awesome to think that it has a 20
and it was very well received as well.
Yeah. Second in the SPF Bow.
Yeah.
Pretty impressive accomplishment. Yeah.
Yeah, it is.
Have you considered releasing the role-playing game as like a
campaign,
a side thing to the book?
Yeah, I thought about it, but like it was, so I wrote like customized the system eventually. It really sort of wasn't written well enough for other people to understand.
Okay.
You know how like when you're making notes for yourself,
yeah,
it's this kind of like shorthand version of the whole thing. So the amount of work to actually make it, palatable for, real humans, it just kind of daunting. And honestly, I'd just rather write more books.
Fair enough.
Like new stuff.
Yeah. There are a lot of things.
It's like a Kickstarter or something. You'd be interested in that.
Yeah. Like, if you throw enough money at me, I'll think about it.
Okay. Because if you want, Mike, I can put up, Spotify have a new thing with podcasts where you can actually add polls into the show. So we can actually survey listeners to see if people are interested in various things we discuss. So if you want me to just gauge interest for it or whatever, do let me know. No pressure though. No pressure.
Role-playing games do very well on Kickstarter. Very well on Kickstarter.
I saw this cool one recently where it's like you're some socialite in like the 1920s, and it was basically The Great Gatsby, a role-playing game. Yeah. And I was like, oh my gosh, this looks so cool. So there seems to be a big market on there for sure. But yeah, we're not trying to pressure you into anything. So it's cool to know that that's where it originated from, though, and like maybe that is why it has so much depth and seems to have resonated with such a large audience potentially.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Dirk, what about you? What have actually, first of all, before we get into that really quickly, Mike, in terms of when you come back to an old project like that, you mentioned that it was easier to just kind of write a clean draft from the beginning. When do you think it's a good idea to try to make little tweaks and edits and retain the original structure versus demolish the whole thing and go again from scratch?
All right. So I find there are two things that happen when you revisit something you've previously written. The good one, and surprisingly often, is it turns out to be not as bad as you thought. That's happened several times where I've abandoned something I was working on and come back to it later and gone, oh shit, this is actually pretty good.
Best feeling.
You know, it's not just salvageable, like it doesn't need a ton of work and rewriting.
Yes.
That's awesome. The other thing that happens is it is so unbelievably painful to read that you're like, nah, fuck it. I can't even bother. I can't even read the rest of this shit, you know? And if it's that painful, then it's like, don't try and salvage it, scrap the thing and start again.
Yeah.
But sometimes and it's happened a bunch of times. Sometimes you go back to it and you're like, actually, this isn't as bad as I thought. And if that's your response, then it's probably salvageable.
That is a good sign. And also I find going back to drafts that I wrote years ago, you have often this strange thing where you totally forget what you wrote and it feels like you're reading someone else's story. And I don't know about you guys, but like I can see you smiling just at the mention of this. Like that is one of the best experiences you can have as a writer, to be reading your own stuff and not recognize or remember the fact that you wrote it, because it allows you to actually experience it with fresh eyes, which is incredible.
Yeah.
Dirk, I want to ask you about your experience with this, but before we get onto that, one of the things I am looking for with the podcast is potentially having a video editor to kind of take out short, like 1 to 4 minute long clips of our various episodes and post them onto our YouTube channel. So I just wanted to give a shout out, well, not a shout out, but let our listeners or viewers know if any of you are watching this and you have video editing experience, hit me up at wizardswarriorswords@gmail.com. This would be a paid position. We'd be using some of our Patreon money to fund the video editors for this. It seems like a good way to kind of grow the podcast so that more people can hear about it. So yeah, if you have video editing experience and it sounds like something that you would be interested in, just email me wizardswarriorswords@gmail.com. The link to that is also in the show notes below, and we'll have a chat and see if it is something that you're interested in or if it's a good fit. I don't really know what it would look like specifically, but if you're already listening to this show, if you're already a fan of this show, it would basically just be like, you pick, you know, like 2 to 3 clips that you really enjoyed from each episode. And then you basically just cutting those out, giving them back to me, and then I would post them on the channel. And it's a way to kind
of photoshopping to make me look better. That's okay.
Little photoshopping to make Fletch look better. See if you can add some hair onto the top. Yeah, what else? Dirk, do you want any modifications?
No.
Dirk is pristine. Do not edit his footage at all.
Not true.
You can add some facial hair onto me to make me look a little bit older.
If they could, wow, it's cool, kind of cool.
It was weird.
If some weird like video weirdness popped up on Jed's picture, if you're watching the video,
that's freaky.
Yeah, just if they could make me not sound like an idiot, that would be good.
That's it. Yeah, so yeah, if you are interested in that, like, feel free to let us know. Like I said, this is a paid position, and it would be using the Patreon money for that as well, which means there would be potential for it to grow, and who knows, might do it in some sort of like profit share thing where it's like, depending on how many views it gets or how much Patreon money is coming in, there's a percentage of that. So anyway, just let me know if you're interested. Truly, I have no idea how many people from our audience also are video editors or whatever, but I think it'll be interesting just to see, because in the past, like, I have clipped up a couple of our old episodes and put them on. And for instance, like one of the Adrian Tchaikovsky episodes had like a little 2-minute clip that I took from that. And that little clip itself had like 600 views on YouTube, and I think directed quite a few hundred views to the longer interview, which would be the whole intention of it, is to try to send it to the longer one. The other thing as well is, one last thing, if you are sending an email in, like, if you do have a couple of links to videos that you've edited in the past or just examples of that, that would also help your application stand out a lot. Okay, recruitment over. I don't know how to recruit people, so this is a weird thing. Dirk, do you want to talk a little bit about your experience sort of resurrecting projects or going back to old drafts that you've done?
My experience hasn't been as clear cut as Mike's of picking up projects that I had completely abandoned or had just been sitting on the shelf for a long time. But when I had been writing screenplays for a long time, and I've written a lot of short stories, and I just had a file full of ideas of things that I wanted to do and some little scenarios. So writing Paternus was quite a bit like resurrecting a lot of those old ideas, right? And then the first thing was figuring out how to make them work and how to make them work together. So I spent months just playing, with a bunch of those, and some of them were very solid and had a lot of notes. It wasn't just like one or two sentences. And some of those were notes. I mean, I was in my 50s when I first started writing. So it's never too late, folks.
Super young, 50.
Yeah,
so
It's
young.
never too late.
young.
I was in my early 50s. So some of these notes were 30, 35 years old.
Whoa.
Hold on, that makes you 90.
Yeah. So I mean, it was collections of things. And, I just was making piles of things that worked with this Paternus story that I had in my mind, and I didn't have a title for it or anything at that point. So there was a lot of that, and then the first draft was actually 2 books, and I had to go back. I went back and cut things down and change some things to the one book, the book 1 in the trilogy, and it covers the same story in half the time, a little more than half the time, half the pages. And the only other real experience I have for that is that I had so many notes, so many backstory notes, that I think I have 5 short stories published out now. All but one are in an anthology of one sort or another. And every one of those, except for one, the latest one that's in Heroes Wanted, The Death of Osiris, came out of some stuff that was cut when I knocked down those 2 books with some rewriting. So I resurrected those backstory things, and then added some other notes, and basically created those short stories. So it's which is kind of fun, because it's also kind of like what Mike talks about. It like saves time. It's like, why write something from scratch when I got all this shit I can just use and save myself a whole shitload of time, and just write them. So get them out as short stories, which is why some of them actually don't work all that well as short stories, meaning they're not, people like them, people really like them, but they aren't your typical, beginning, middle, end, nice arc stories. They're basically just a travelogue of some sort.
And they're part of like a bigger sort of piece, but you're not seeing the beginning and end of that piece.
Yeah. And, I tried to give them some beginning, middle, and end, and put some excitement in there, but they aren't your traditional structure of your traditional short story. But then I find that the one I wrote from scratch, from just some notes out of Heroes Wanted anthology, that Death of Osiris thing, was based on notes. It was stuff that was backstory. It had not been something I cut out, but it is something that I had in my notes and been alluding to a past of a couple of the characters. And why they had such an antagonistic relationship. And this kind of explains where it got worse They were on opposite sides and had always been, but this is what made it worse. So I actually wrote that short story of that event in the past. So that's really most all of my experience with resurrecting stuff.
Sure. Do you guys, this isn't necessarily about resurrecting a story, but when you come back to a draft that has been a couple of weeks since you've last read it, maybe you've forgotten, you've done another project or something, are there any particular methods that you're using to sort of get back into that? So for example, I usually try to read through the whole thing and I take notes that just give me a rough understanding of the story and tell me what I need to kind of focus on as I go through editing for it. Do you guys do anything similar to that? Or do you just like, you know, go on a page one and start reading?
That's exactly what I do.
Cool.
Yeah, I probably won't take notes, but like a sort of fast read through is pretty common. If I'm going back to something in progress, I'll probably just reread like the last chapter or two, just to sort of like put myself back in the voice and remind myself where I was. Generally, I'm pretty good at holding a book in my head. So usually I can go back to it and I kind of know what I was working on and where it's going next and stuff. Yeah, so less notes, but yeah, definitely a reread for sure.
Cool. Same for you, Doug?
Pretty much what you do, Jed, what you explained.
Yeah, fair enough.
Pretty much exactly that.
Sweet. Anything else to kind of add to this topic before we wrap up this particular episode? Or have we nailed it yet again?
Yeah, no, we nailed it. We're awesome. Don't throw shit out. Keep your old drafts. Keep your partial novels.
Yeah.
I have half a dozen or more partial novels with anywhere from like 20 to 60,000 words in them. Some of them handwritten, which really sucks because they're a pain in the ass to A, keep, and B, go back and read. But these were all ideas that bugged me enough that I had to start writing them. So at some point, like if my brain slows down to the point where I'm like, I'm not currently being pestered by an idea, I have all these things started.
Yes.
I can go back to them, and I know some of them are cool enough that they weren't being books.
Yeah,
it's a good approach.
Definitely don't throw anything away, and always try to keep in mind the stuff that you have that's either been discarded or is on the back burner. Yeah, because you never know, it might become useful.
Awesome. All right, well,
it has for me.
That was a good episode. Yes, thank you to our patrons for helping support this show. If you want to join our Patreon for a small monthly donation, you can get access to ad-free versions of these episodes and exclusive bonuses like free advanced reader copies from us, editorial feedback, and other cool behind-the-scenes things. Special thank you also to our 2 high-tier patrons, Daniel and Christopher, and to the rest of you as well. Thank you for supporting us on Patreon, and we will see you all next time. Bye, everybody.
Ciao.
Bye-bye. Thank you.